Well, let's turn to the situation on the ground. Elai, I'd like to turn to you. You've been doing a lot of work on the whole question of supply of electricity, fuel, water to the civilians of Gaza. Can you just run us through what does Gaza look like? And is there really, are they about to starve? Are they about to die from lack of water? Is Israel preventing supply of medical help at hospitals because it's refusing to supply electricity?
So thank you, Andrew, for inviting me. It's an honor to speak here. I'll give a background, kind of what's going on in Gaza, how the energy sector looks like, the connection between water and electricity. And I'm going to, at least now for the first 5 minutes, I'm going to try to do it as academically as possible, just to show the complexity, and then we can go into, okay, so what do we do about it? But I want to share a map because it's always much easier to kind of understand it when you visualize it. So hopefully you're now seeing a map of electricity lines going into Gaza. So on the first day of the war, or the second day after the massacre, Israel, when it began the campaign, announced that it's going to cut off electricity, water, and diesel supply into Gaza. Not food or medicine, but those three things. So it's important to understand, what does that mean? If Israel cuts electricity supply to Gaza, does that mean that Gaza doesn't have electricity? So on a regular day, before these events of October 7, around 50% of the electricity in Gaza comes straight from Israel through 10 power lines that you see here. The electricity it's about 120 megawatts every day. The electricity is given to Gaza at no cost. Hamas doesn't pay for it. Technically, the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank is supposed to pay for it, but they refuse because they don't want to support Hamas. And so the debt just accumulates and eventually is forgiven every few years. We can go into why Israel provides it for free and the complexity of it. But what is important to understand is that this is 50%. So on the day on October 7, most of the power lines going into Gaza were damaged. So they were damaged because of Hamas rockets. This often happens when there's a rocket exchange. A lot of the rockets hit the electricity grids themselves, and thus they cut themselves off of the electricity. But then Israel is quick to repair it. This time, the Israeli electricity company said, we're not going to repair it, and we're not going to allow additional electricity into. So that's 50%, and that's what Israel cut. The other 50% is generated locally. 25% is with a power plant in Gaza that runs on diesel fuel. And the other 25% is a wide spread of small-scale diesel generators that people have in their houses. The hospitals, the desalination plants, they all have these small-scale diesel generators, so they're not connected to the main grid, even if there's no electricity at all. So long as they have diesel, they have electricity. And of course, Hamas bases, underground bases, they all have these small-scale diesel generators. And other than that, Gaza has one of the largest penetration of solar panels, solar energy in the world. 25% is during the night. It's the diesel powered, but during the day, it's the solar panels, rooftop solar panels. So this means that, generally speaking, Gazans who can afford it have their own means of electricity. And the reason is because even on a day-to-day basis before the war started, Gazans are used to not having a lot of electricity. On an average day, average citizen in Gaza would get between 4 to 8 hours of continuous electricity during the day from the main grid. This has been the situation since 2014, since Operation Protective Edge, because Hamas has never bothered to repair the infrastructure since 2014, although a lot of foreign aid was given to Hamas specifically to repair that infrastructure. The money went somewhere else. So because of that, the Gazans that could afford it took care of themselves. So they bought the small-scale diesel-powered or the rooftop solar panels, and they are off-grid, which means that even if Israel cuts the electricity, even if the power plant stops to work, around 25% of Gaza is still electrified, which means hospitals still have electricity, small businesses, government buildings, and of course, Hamas headquarters so long as they store diesel, and according to assessments, they have stored diesel for the underground bases of Hamas for at least 4 months ahead. They have electricity, and the people who are suffering are basically whoever is not Hamas or not connected enough to Hamas to receive diesel from them, because diesel is not running out for Hamas, it's running out for the rest. Now, you can see that on day one. So the day that Israel, I said, right, there was a power plant that provides 25%. The day that Israel announced that it's cutting off diesel supply, that same evening, Hamas announced that there's no more diesel for the power plant, and the power plant shut down. That is unlikely. That's not how diesel power plants operate. They need at least 4 days worth of storage in order to operate. So if at the same evening that Israel cuts off the diesel supply, the power plant is off, it means Hamas shut it down and just depleted all of the diesel from the power plant, presumably for their own bases, which was a common wartime measure, but it means that most Gazans suddenly lost electricity because of that. And so only the ones that have the small-scale generators sell electricity to their neighbors. It's a very unregulated market. Now, so where is the main problem here? And that's where the complexity lies, is the issue of water. Because the hospitals have small-scale generators. The people who can afford it have small-scale diesel generators and solar rooftop panels. The Hamas bases have, but the problem is the water supply, because the water doesn't run through the pipelines without continuous electricity from the main grid. And that's where the issue is. So even if Israel, according to international law, let's say Israel is considered an occupying force, it is not required to provide electricity, but it is required to provide water. But water and electricity are mixed together, because without electricity, water doesn't flow. The reason for that is that on a regular day, only 10% of the water in Gaza comes from Israel. 90% of the water in Gaza is local, so it's drilled from local aquifers. The problem with that is that the vast majority of that water that is drilled from local aquifers is undrinkable. It's not fit to drink according to standard UN measures. It's salty and it's contaminated. One of the main reasons for that is because it's so unregulated and so lawless in Gaza that just everybody who can and have the means to it, they just drill their own well. In their backyard, they sell water to their neighbors. And because everybody is drilling into the aquifer, a lot of sewage water seeps into it and it contaminates the aquifers. So most of that water is undrinkable. It needs to go through water treatment plants. Gaza has several water treatment plants, as you see in these in this map. They were built by EU and the UN Development Program, but again, they need electricity. They have their own small-scale diesel generators, but the question is, once they run out of the diesel, then they can't purify water anymore. And so because of that, Israel had to very quickly into the war, despite its claim that it's going to cut off water, it resumed water into Gaza because otherwise you're not meeting the basic criteria of international law. And so that means that most Gazans rely on water trucks and filling in their own jerrycans and containment to have their own water. And that's the situation. And so electricity and water can't be divorced. And diesel is used to generate electricity. So diesel, electricity, and water are mixed together in the case of Gaza, which complicates everything very much. Now, the issue about diesel is that you don't actually know how much diesel is in there in Gaza currently. The IDF showed satellite imagery of silos that have around 500,000 liters of diesel. And the argument is that underground in the bases, there's another million liters of diesel. It's very hard to confirm and it's very hard to assess. But if there is 1.5 million liters, then that's about 4 to 6 months worth of electricity generation for, if you give it to the hospitals, if you give it to the desalination plants and the Hamas headquarters. So that's the current situation in Gaza. It complicates everything. I will say the last thing before we move on is that a lot of these problems were supposed to be solved in the very near future. In the past year, the Israeli government, despite being the most right-wing Israeli government in its history, has approved a number of projects that were meant to solve a lot of Gaza's electricity and water problems. In June, Israel, for the first time, approved the development of the Gaza marine field. First time in 20 years, this government approved it. The idea was that Gaza will be able to develop its own gas field. It's a very small gas field, but it's considerable for Gaza because then it can use its own gas to generate its power plant. And this project called Gas for Gaza, which was supposed to bring also gas from Israel and to upgrade their power plant. Instead of running on diesel and only generating 65 megawatts, it was supposed to run on natural gas and generate 600 megawatts. And the third project was a port in Egypt next to Gaza that was supposed to kind of serve as Gaza's own port to be more independent, less dependent on Israel, because Israel can't actually cut it off of electricity without also creating a water crisis. All of these plans currently are down the drain. I know the assumption was that at the end of the day, Hamas wants to govern its people. It wants to provide a better infrastructure for its people. And so the government believed in it and decided to create these trust building measures. All of them are currently down the drain, but hopefully in the future, whatever Gaza looks like in the future, these projects will help it become more independent in terms of electricity and infrastructure.
Elai, thank you so much. That's been extremely helpful. So, I mean, one of the big questions is, how can it possibly be, since Hamas came to power in 2007 and even since Protective Edge 2014, that Hamas, which pretends to be the government in the Gaza Strip, has not built the infrastructure, the water, the electricity infrastructure that would normally be the case for a government. And despite the funding that you said has come from the UN and others, how much money has been poured into Gaza in the last decade or so? And
that's a contentious issue. A lot of money has been poured into Gaza, mostly from Western countries. Mostly the US is the biggest donor, the EU, and both through the EU structure and through individual EU members. Much more, by the way, than much more than any Arab state or Gulf state. A lot of Western money is poured into. So any infrastructure that does exist, the water desalination plant, the water treatment plants, the pipelines that Hamas members dug up from the ground, as they showed in their video, and made rockets out of it, all of that is UN, EU, US funded projects. Whatever was given directly to Hamas was not used for the purposes that was given. The money disappeared, the concrete disappeared. Apparently, in hindsight, it all went down to its underground city. But that's the story of Gaza, that the money doesn't get to. Hamas used a lot of the resources it got for its own needs, not for state building. At no point did they engage in state building or state capacity. The only things that are reminiscent of a state is built by others, not by Hamas.
Okay.